Helene Pruszynski was the youngest of three children, born to Chester Pruszynski, an Army veteran and engineer, and his wife Henrietta. She grew up first in South Huntington on Long Island, where she developed a love for baseball and the New York Mets. In 1972, the family relocated to Hamilton, Massachusetts, a small town northeast of Boston. At 21 years old, Helene was an aspiring journalist attending college in Massachusetts. In early January 1980, she had moved from Massachusetts to Colorado just 2 weeks before her death. She had secured an internship at KHOW AM radio station in Denver, working in the news department. During her brief time in Colorado, she stayed with relatives in Englewood and commuted daily by bus to and from the radio station in downtown Denver. On January 16, 1980, Pruszynski was abducted near her bus stop in Englewood, Colorado. She had been returning home from her internship that evening. When she failed to arrive home, her aunt became concerned and contacted police around 10:30 p.m. to report her missing. Her friend and housemate, Kitsy Snow, kept a journal documenting the agonizing hours of waiting. At 11 p.m. on January 16th, she wrote about the growing dread as they waited for Helene to return. By 1 a.m., she noted that nothing had changed. At 3 a.m., they were deciding when to call Helene's parents, knowing something was very wrong. The next day, on January 17, 1980, Helene Pruszynski was found stabbed to death in a field near Daniels Park Road in Castle Pines. Her body was found partially naked with her hands behind her back. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed 9 times in the back. At 1:30 p.m., a detective and the coroner arrived at the home where Helene had been staying. Helene's parents arrived shortly before 4 p.m. that day. Bob Scott, a co-worker at the radio station who had described Helene as very bright with a great sense of humor, had to identify her body. Investigators collected everything they could find that might help identify the killer, including an empty milk carton, bread, and an old can. They photographed the scene and made plaster casts of tire tracks and footprints. Detectives suspected from the beginning that the killer wore cowboy boots, based on the footprint evidence. A witness came forward after news of the crime broke. She had been driving along Daniels Park Road around 10:20 p.m. the night Helene disappeared and had seen a man in the area where the body would be discovered. The witness provided a detailed description, and a sketch was created depicting a Caucasian male with dark hair, light eyes, and a mustache. However, the sketch did not lead to a suspect. Investigators preserved male DNA recovered from the scene, but no analysis was done immediately after the slaying. KHOW radio offered a reward for information leading to the killer's arrest, but received no tips. Despite extensive questioning and canvassing during the crucial first 48 hours, police were left without solid leads. The case went cold. The case was reopened periodically over the following decades. In 1998, a DNA profile was developed and uploaded to a criminal database, but no potential suspects were identified. As more people were added to the database over the years, still no matches emerged. The case was reinvestigated several times, but each attempt ended without answers. Meanwhile, Helene's family lived with the unresolved tragedy. Her sister Janet Johnson described how the murder devastated the family forever. Wendy Jerome was a 14-year-old girl living with her family on Denver Street in Rochester, New York in 1984. She was described by her mother Marlene as the sweetest and most caring little girl in the whole world. Wendy had a close relationship with her family, including her brother Bill and her father, who would later pass away in 2011 without seeing justice for his daughter.
On Thanksgiving night, November 22, 1984, Wendy asked for permission to walk from her home to deliver a birthday card to her best friend who lived on Alexis Street in the same neighborhood. The destination was only 3 blocks away, a short walk through a familiar area. Her mother, Marlene, took a nap on the living room couch around 6 p.m. that evening. When she woke up around 8 p.m., she went looking for Wendy, running upstairs and downstairs through the house. Wendy was not there. At approximately 10:40 p.m. that night, Rochester Police Department officers responded to a call on the 500 block of Webster Avenue. A pedestrian walking through the neighborhood had discovered the body of a child next to a dumpster near School 33. The body was partially covered and showed obvious signs of trauma. It was Wendy Jerome. She had been found in an alcove at the back of the school, bruised, bleeding, and cut. Wendy had been raped and murdered approximately a quarter mile from her own home. An autopsy later determined that she died from massive blunt force trauma and multiple lacerations to her body. Her throat had been slit and she had been beaten to death. The extent of her injuries indicated that Wendy had put up a fight against her attacker. 2 hours after Marlene Jerome woke from her nap, police were knocking on the door of her Denver Street home. That knock would change her life forever. November 22 would become a day of hysterical crying for decades to come. A day when the Jerome family lost Wendy and began a nearly 40-year wait for justice. The investigation began immediately that Thanksgiving night. Crime scene technicians, including Michael Mazzeo, who was then a civilian crime scene technician with the Rochester Police Department, processed the scene and collected evidence. They photographed everything and gathered all available physical evidence. Most importantly, investigators collected DNA evidence from the crime scene, including semen found during the autopsy. This evidence would prove crucial decades later. Despite an exhaustive initial investigation, there were no witnesses to the crime. Investigators determined that the suspect was an African-American male based on the evidence collected, but they had no specific leads to follow. The case soon went cold, but it was never forgotten. Over the years, as investigators who worked the case retired, others took up the investigation, determined to someday provide answers to Wendy's family. In 2000, investigators took an important step forward when they completed a DNA profile from the evidence and loaded it into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, which is used to help identify criminal suspects. However, the sample did not yield any matches in the federal database. The DNA profile sat in the system for years as more and more offenders were added to the database, but still no match emerged. Marlene Jerome never gave up hope. She remained steadfast in ensuring that the community did not forget Wendy. She continued to advocate for her daughter and stayed in regular contact with law enforcement. Her persistence and the determination of investigators kept the case alive even as the years turned into decades. The case had a profound impact on many people in the Rochester community. Julie Hahn, who would later become the chief of the Major Felony Bureau in the Monroe County District Attorney's Office, was just 11 years old in Rochester when Wendy was murdered. Her mother told her about Jerome's death, and the story affected her deeply. She decided that she wanted to be an attorney who gave voice to victims of crime. The story of Wendy Jerome helped shape her into the prosecutor she would become. In 2011, Hahn became directly involved in Wendy's case and would later have the opportunity to prosecute it. Every time DNA technology advanced over the years, someone would review the case again to see if new methods could provide answers. In April 2019, investigators submitted the full DNA profile to the New York State Crime Lab requesting a familial DNA search. This type of search looks not just for exact matches, but for relatives of the person whose DNA is in the system. Wendy Jerome's case was the second one submitted for this type of search in New York State. The request required special permission from the state, as familial DNA searches were not routinely conducted. In June 2020, investigators finally received the familial search results they had been waiting for. The DNA had led them to a relative of the suspect, and through that connection, they identified their target, Timothy Williams. Williams was 20 years old in 1984 and had lived in Wendy Jerome's neighborhood at the time of her murder. Shortly after the crime, he moved to Florida. By 2020, Williams was 56 years old and living in Melbourne, Florida. On September 9, 2020, nearly 36 years after Wendy Jerome's murder, Rochester police arrested Timothy Williams in Florida on charges of rape and second-degree murder. He was arraigned on September 11, 2020. The announcement of his arrest was made at a press conference attended by Monroe County District Attorney Sandra Dorley, members of the Rochester Police Department's Major Felony Bureau, and Marlene Jerome. At the press conference, Captain Frank Umbrino of the Rochester Police Department became emotional as he addressed Marlene Jerome directly. He told her he was sorry it took so long, but that they had finally done it. He gave the grieving mother a long hug. Marlene Jerome thanked everyone in the police department who had worked on the case since day one and remained by her side. She said she never thought she would see this day come. She expressed one regret, that her husband, who had died in 2011, was not alive to witness the arrest. District Attorney Sandra Dorley told Marlene that she had never given up hope and had remained steadfast in ensuring the community did not forget Wendy. Dorley assured her that law enforcement had never forgotten her daughter. Williams was extradited back to Rochester to face prosecution. The case marked the first time that familial DNA had been used to resolve a cold case murder in New York State. The trial, however, would not be straightforward. The first trial ended in a mistrial in December 2023 due to allegations of juror misconduct. A retrial was scheduled. During the retrial in early 2024, prosecutors presented their DNA evidence and witnesses testified about the crime scene and investigation. Michael Mazzeo, who had been a crime scene technician in 1984 and later became president of the Rochester Police Union, described the photos and evidence collected. He told the court it had been an emotional scene for everyone working the case. Marlene Jerome testified about the panic she felt when she woke up and realized Wendy wasn't home. Timothy Williams took the stand in his own defense during the trial, but the jury was not swayed. On March 8, 2024, after approximately 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Timothy Williams guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Wendy Jerome. Marlene Jerome and her son Bill Jerome were present for the verdict. Bill Jerome said he was glad it was finally over and that the family could begin to heal, though Wendy would never leave their minds and memories. District Attorney Sandra Dorley said that justice delayed was not going to be justice denied for Wendy, and that after almost 40 years they were able to get justice for her. On April 17, 2024, Williams was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Both Marlene Jerome and Bill Jerome gave victims impact statements in court. Marlene told the judge that for 35 years, Williams had the opportunity to come forward and turn himself in, but instead chose to further her pain and that of the family by remaining silent. She called him a coward. She told the judge that what he did to her daughter and the life he stole from her was unforgivable, and that his actions tore the hearts and souls out of her father, her brother, and herself. She asked the judge to impose the maximum sentence for the heinous crimes committed against her defenseless child who fought with everything she had to survive. The judge sentenced Williams to the maximum, 25 years to life in prison. Marlene Jerome said she was glad Williams got what he deserved and that the judge did right. She said the door was finally closed on this chapter. November 22, 2024, marked 40 years since Wendy Jerome was found murdered. but it was also the first November 22 since 1984 that the Jerome family had justice. Marlene said that year was very different from all the years past and that she had come a long way since that terrible day. The healing could finally begin. Though Timothy Williams spent nearly 36 years as a free man, he is now serving his sentence. Marlene Jerome said she will never forgive him, but she is relieved to finally have justice 4 decades later.